Throughout this entire conversation, I've thought about 20 people that I need to send this to. You had this idea for the TripAdvisor for skincare.
People ask, like, why was it so successful? It was common sense. And I remember from the second I met Brendan, he was a genius. You couldn't help but like be in awe of him. Then we launched The Ordinary at the end of 2016. The business was exploding.
It's quite mad what you guys did. Brandon sounds like a brilliant guy. He sounds like a maverick. So when did you first start noticing that something was off with him?
I've never seen a human change so quickly. He'd left his body. Everyone was petrified.
What would you call it? A psychotic break?
It's so hard to diagnose. It was all on Instagram. It was very public.
Were you devastated?
He shut down the whole company. That was the point when then everyone had to step in. So then a court order was applied to remove him. And I was 7 months pregnant at that point. Where is he? Like, is he safe? What's he doing? And then he passed away. And I feel like in many ways I still haven't stopped to process a lot of it. I don't know what you can do differently. So I think what I've learned is...
This podcast is called Begin Again, and you've done that again and again and again. And now, where are you at? I can't think of a better way to end than with that. Today I'm going to be talking to Nicola Kilner, and she is an incredible businesswoman. She was the co-founder and CEO of Deciem, a beauty brand, umbrella brand that had The Ordinary, which became a £1 billion selling business. I love this woman, and I think she's going to bring something for everyone, young or old, ideas, inspiration, and lots of life experience. Oh, by the way, if you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe, because then you can get lots more episodes. I'd like to go back to where you were born. Were you born in Sheffield?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was born in Sheffield and spent all of my life there until I went to university. My mum and dad were both from Sheffield. Everyone in my kind of family was from there. And like, I love Sheffield. I think it's just like that northern city where everyone is kind and warm, has like a bit of grit to themselves too.
Tell me what your dad was like, because he sort of encouraged you, didn't he, on the business side of things?
Yeah, so for me, my dad was just like so much charisma, so much energy. You know, he was the kind of person that would like light up every room. You know, my mum was kind of more reserved, like a little bit more in the wings, but my dad was kind of just the life and the soul and the energy. And you know, I remember when we used to like growing up watching you and Big Brother, and like he'd always like come and sit on my knee, have a cuddle, like so kind of very loving. But at the same time, I think he had a challenging upbringing. I remember he was like the first child to ever get expelled from his from his junior school. I think he started smoking when he was like 10, and you know, and I maybe don't know all the complexities, but I think he maybe had challenges in his childhood. And as much as he was this like energy and this light and this charisma, he also had kind of mood swings, and you know, you would know when to be scared.
So he would sometimes make you scared, like
yeah.
he was that erratic.
If he was angry, I remember like the whole house would be in silence and just like creeping around with my mum and feeling that fear.
Yes.
More just from, you know, never from violence or anything, but more just from him being angry and like the mood swings that would be there.
It's interesting, isn't it, trying to learn how to handle someone's anger and how frightening it can be, even though violence is not the threat. It's the perception of the anger and how that makes you feel and behave.
Yeah.
It's such a strange thing, because you don't think you're going to get hit, but you feel like you might at any moment.
Yeah. And like, even though I hate confrontation, like I'm very happy to like have like a heated debate. Like, I'm happy to disagree with someone as long as it's like respectful.
Yes.
And like there's respect there. But I hate, and like, you know, I'm lucky my husband's super calm. Like, I don't think we've ever had a raised voice in, you know, the 15 years we've been together. Because I'd get like sad if there was like ever that feeling of like anger or confrontation. But it's interesting because you see, I've only actually ever been to 2 therapy sessions because I felt like there was just some stuff that I was kind of crying about, and it's one of those things where I feel very mentally and emotionally stable, but I was like, actually, the fact that I would cry quite easily about a couple of topics, I was like, maybe there is more to evolve.
Do you mind me asking what those topics were?
Mainly when I talk about like either my dad dying or Brandon dying. And I think it's just those periods of, I don't know, like, and even now actually, that's me just talking about my dad then, like normally I'd be crying. So like even that's
You're
just
fine.
Like, good sign. So it's really interesting because one thing she said to me was she was like, most success, like she was, so I basically, and my dad eventually became an alcoholic. He always liked to drink, but was never kind of dependent. But quite quickly, something kind of happened. And I think he then lost his job. I even think things like, you know, me and my sister moving out when we went to university, like kind of just this loss of purpose. I think kind of things escalated quite quickly. But anyway, it's interesting because she said actually so many successful people are those that come from a family where they almost have like one, like an alcoholic or kind of like a challenging parent, and then the other parent, like my mum, who's just the most loving, kindest, calmest, sweetest, like most stable, supportive person. And she was like, that combination, she was like, if you've grown up with like medium trauma, actually it kind of creates you to be who you are. And it's one of those things where like I think about my strengths, and it's, you know, never being like the smartest or any of those things, but I think I'm a really good reader of people and emotions. And actually, like when you like read into actually like growing up in a childhood like that, you read the room, you know when to stay silent, you know when to like ask a question, like, and I don't think you necessarily realize that as a child, what you're learning, but actually learning for me, like growing up in that environment, then when you become business and it's ups and downs and so much shit happens along the way, you're actually just like, I'm always calm, like nothing phases me. And I think that's because actually like, I remember like, you know, my mum, if my dad was in a bad mood, like we'd be petrified to go back in the house and just like not want to make any noise in case it like triggered him being angry.
It was interesting that you said that he became an alcoholic, because when you were talking, I thought this sounds like the kind of behavior that we adopt around an alcoholic, because you're not quite sure when they're just going to flip and completely change in one moment. But it sounds like he was, it's what we would call a dry drunk. It was someone who was behaving like an alcoholic, and yet he wasn't drunk.
And like he always lied to drink, but I never remember, it was like consistent, you know, he was the kind of person that would, you know, have a couple of glasses of wine with dinner, he'd have a vodka before bed, but I never remember any peaks of there being like a drunk episode. But you see quite quickly, and I think, you know, when and actually I remember the doctors in hospital saying to us like he was almost unlucky, because they said actually how quickly he deteriorated wouldn't normally happen. They were like, normally people can actually survive years of drinking heavily, whereas actually within like probably about 3 years he'd gone. But I also remember at one point the doctor saying to us like, with alcoholism, like it's a terminal illness. Sorry,
Yes. No, it is. I don't know if you know, my mum was an alcoholic, so I totally get you.
But yeah, I remember a doctor just taking us into a room and he was like, it is a terminal illness, because even if he ever stops drinking, like it's always going to be there, like there's always going to be triggers. And I remember like he'd be in hospital and he'd walk out of hospital to go to an off license to buy a bottle of vodka, and you're like, you're in hospital. And I feel like I'm so grateful that I think we're starting to know so much more about addictions and mental health, and like I hope there becomes like much more treatment and awareness, because when someone's brain is effectively the thing that's ill, and obviously we'll talk about Brandon later, but it was like a similar thing. But when it's someone's brain, like they can't themselves see the illness, like and not to say it's easier, but like if someone has cancer, like there's a test result, there's a treatment plan, and largely everyone's aligned on like fighting to get that person better. When it's like an addiction or mental health, the brain is telling that person that nothing's wrong and like that everyone else is kind of out to get them. And you can't get that support. And I also think there's like a stigma as well. I can remember with my dad, like we tried to hide it.
Yes.
And, like, it feels so strange that we could never just say what we were suffering from.
Yes, there is. I remember visiting a good girlfriend of mine I was at school with, and I found out she was in hospital. And I went to visit her, and she was yellow. And her eyeballs, the whites of her eyes were yellow.
Yeah.
And I was like, I could help you, you know, do you want me to help you get you into treatment? She said, it's a tough one, that. She said, I just don't know. It's hard to let go of this. And I thought, but you know you're going to die if you don't.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, but it's still hard to let it go. And I thought, wow, that's the choice.
Yeah.
Let go or die. And it's still a hard choice. And when it gets to that point, you love drinking so much that you'd rather die than not drink.
Yeah. And I think it's sometimes hard to like empathize with it, because for me, like, and I think I have a very healthy relationship, like love a few drinks with my friends, but like, you know, I don't particularly like drink in the week or at home. So to me, the thought of like, I'm going to like not see my children, like I'm going to lose my life for a drink. It's like hard to comprehend,
Feels
which
like
is
madness.
why I think like for me, it does help to just understand like the brain is so powerful. And if that person's brain really is changed to that way, like it's hard to bring them back. But yeah, I remember like the yellowness and like the smell, but it's not the smell of the alcohol on the breath. It's like seeping.
Yeah. It's like you're rotting from the inside.
Yeah.
How was your mother through all of this?
She was good. She was just like strong in a way of, you know, it's difficult when someone's very like a strong character and powerful. And he's always, you know, my mum was stay at home for many years, and when, you know, she worked, but it was like part-time receptionist and kind of things here and there. So like my dad was, you know, they were very traditional in like the roles. My mum did all the cooking, the cleaning. So I think it was difficult because I don't think no one could have stopped my dad from drinking. No. And I think it's one of the things you always thought about, like, could we have done anything differently? But again, I think we're still, as a society, and it's great that I think there's so much more awareness coming about alcohol. But we still, it's like all those things, like you still have to justify more not drinking than drinking.
Yes.
And it's still like, as a society, like we kind of, I don't think fully understand how addictive it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, my mum was super strong, but she was just incredibly warm. And like, I think for me and my sister, like you always felt her unconditional love, and she was there. And also I think I also have the respect that like, I knew she would never leave him, but I loved her for that. It was kind of a like, we're a family, like through thick and thin, like we're together, we're staying as a unit, like we will survive this.
Okay. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was the quite traditional aspect of your family, about your mum playing traditional kind of mum housewife role with part-time jobs, and then your dad being the provider. But your dad seemed really keen on trying to help you become more than that. Do you think he saw an entrepreneurial flair in you, or do you think he was just trying to say you can do more than just being a stay-at-home mum? You could go into business, because didn't he gift you business books for Christmas and things like that?
That was more me asking for them.
Oh, was it?
So I think I was more the...
How old were you then when you were asking for business books?
Probably like definitely from like 12, 13. Like I used to love watching like Dragon's Den and just, but again, like I think a lot of in England, and like we were definitely comfortable, like middle class, and like, you know, a lovely house, and kind of lucky that mum didn't have to work, but we didn't have spare cash. So I always had this feeling like I want to have freedom in life. Like, I want to go on the holidays I want to buy what I want, and I don't want to rely on a man or anyone else for that. Like, I just want to kind of be in control of buying what I want and kind of no one having to have an opinion on that. So I think that was more of my motivation. And I think, again, like seeing, you know, when it was like a difficult chicken and egg, like when my dad got ill, he obviously lost his job, and then that kind of made it worse. Like, because it's ultimately like a business, you're an employee, and if you don't do the service, eventually like the paychecks stop and you lose that. So I think even seeing that made me kind of like, gosh, I don't want anyone to be able to dispose of me. Like, I kind of want to be in control and kind of really just like own my own destiny a lot more.
So you did business at uni.
For me, university is one of those things that I don't really think you need to go unless you want to become a doctor or a lawyer. Like, you need to learn like that field.
So to get into business, if there's anybody watching and they think their kids are into it,
I don't think you don't need to go. University.
That's interesting.
I do think university is just a great life experience. Like,
yes,
I think that age of like 18 to 21, the fact you can go to another city, you live away, like you're learning so many skills of like independence, making new friends. So I feel like it's worth it from that perspective. But from business, you could go into another company and get that experience. So I was kind of like a little bit back and forth. I spoke to my head of sixth form, who was also my business studies teacher. And she told me about this course, which was a business studies in management course, where effectively you did the first year as normal at university, and then years 2 and years 3, you got sponsored by a blue chip company. So I did mine at Boots, and it was just like the best experience, because when I finished university after 3 years, those 2 years, I'd done 4 different roles at Boots, like seeing different areas of the business.
So good.
And actually, Boots are a phenomenal employer for actually just like really looking after their people, like investing in growth. So I worked I was the assistant buyer on premium fashion brands. And that was a time when there was like lots of new brands coming in. So I really enjoyed getting to work with kind of these indie brands and giving them advice. And okay, look, we're going to list you, but you need a PR agency, you know, you need all of these things in place to actually make sure that consumers are coming in to buy the products. And through that, I think I was lucky that they kind of spotted that. I think I had a slightly different skill set. I think it's much more common now around, but then at the time. And they actually created a brand new role for me, which was to be their buying manager for innovation, which they'd never had before. And this was really someone who could kind of go and find new brands, but really just handhold them and say, like, come into Boots, like, we're not scary, like, we're going to work with a plan on how you actually can have success in Boots, and not just get the listing and then, you know, we return the stock 6 months later. And
how old were you at this point?
I think I was like 22.
You know how amazing that is for a 22-year-old to get an entirely new role made for her.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And like, I remember even just going into the corridor to ring my mum, like, because it wasn't expected. And, you know, they're like, to get to a buyer, my role was to move sideways into healthcare. You know, like they have all these career plans, like you need to do this and you need to do this.
This is the normal trajectory.
So it was completely unexpected.
I would like to ask you, so you were at Boots, they'd created this role for you. You did really enjoy being at Boots, but in early-ish 2000s, was it 2011, did you meet Brandon?
Yeah, so Brandon was with his previous beauty company called Indeed Labs. So he'd been one of the brands that I'd been nurturing. And I remember from the second I met Brendan, he'd like bounce into reception, and just when someone's just so, you know, when you just fall in love with someone instantly, you're like, this person, like, he was a genius, but also just actually his personality was just like, you couldn't help but like be in awe of him. So I met him when he was doing an Indeed, and we did a couple of launches through the innovation program that I was managing. And then suddenly out of the blue, I got an email to say that he'd left Indeed. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's happened? Because, I mean, their product launches were so successful at Boots. It was like some of the biggest launches we'd ever had. And I was also like gutted. I was like, I don't want this person to be gone from my life, kind of what's going to happen. So this was happening. And at the same time, like, I'd always wanted to have my own business. And I'd found that since working in beauty, all of my friends, family, everyone was like, well, what's the best mascara? What is the best foundation? What's the best serum? And I was thinking kind of around, you know, if you went on holiday, you would go on TripAdvisor and, you know, you'd look at rankings and reviews, but it didn't really exist the same way for beauty. So I'd message Brandon and be like, oh, look, I have this like business idea that I really want to do, but I would love some advice, like when you're next in London, because he lived in Toronto, like, could we meet? So I think quite quickly he was in London, I met him and I spoke about my idea and he was like, perfect, I'll help you build that, but will you kind of help me do Deciem? And like, we'll do both together. So I was like, perfect.
What's interesting when you're talking about meeting Brandon and you had this idea for the TripAdvisor for skincare, but he also had Deciem. Could you just explain for anybody that's watching that didn't know the beginning concept of Deciem? Because to me, knowing my partner's an entrepreneur, you know, I've got friends that have started businesses. It's quite mad what you guys did, because everybody always goes, start one business and really concentrate on that. But that's not what you did.
No. So Deciem's from the Latin word for the number 10. So it was all about building 10 brands at once. And the thinking behind this was, first of all, like, we wanted to bring everything in-house. We wanted to have our own labs, our own creative team. And if you're just building one brand, like, it's difficult maybe to justify all of those resources, which is why most entrepreneurs, you end up outsourcing everything. And like, that is one way that does work for so many people. But for us, we felt like when you outsource, like, they're wearing other people's hats too. They're not like living and breathing it like we are. So we wanted to bring everything in-house. But also, you know, if I was flying to Australia to meet a buyer on one brand, well, why don't I go meet 10 buyers and do 10 brands and actually build so many more efficiencies by doing it that way? And so that was kind of the thinking behind it. And you see, another thing that I think was really interesting was everyone we hired had very little experience.
Really?
And again, partly that was because as a startup, you can't, like, experience means high salary. We couldn't afford anyone with high salaries. So effectively, everyone we were hiring were early, like in their 20s, out of college, out of school, you know, maybe they'd had kind of one role. But actually, that was the success of Deciem, because experience can really work from in many ways. And like, there are certain fields you need experience. But if you want to do something differently, experience can sometimes be the worst thing you have, because experience means you think about doing it the way everyone else does it. If you don't have experience, then you don't know. And actually, so like, we often talk about common sense. And like, I think The Ordinary is such a good example of this. Like, people ask, like, why was it so successful? And I'm like, it was common sense. Like, people want to know the ingredients. Like, if you have a headache, you would walk into a pharmacy, you know, you'd go and buy paracetamol or aspirin. Like, we know when it comes to healthcare, the basic ingredients we would buy for our needs. Yet you would walk into a beauty hall and, you know, maybe like a retinol or hyaluronic had some awareness, but largely ingredients were not known. So you would go and pick which serum or like moisturizer you wanted to buy, which was largely just based on either a recommendation or maybe it was a
nice packaging
or whoever caught your attention first on a counter at a department store. Like, people didn't have that awareness of ingredients, which is so important, because like, you need to know, like, you know, for some people retinol works amazing, for other people maybe vitamin C is better, but if you don't know which ingredients you're using, how do you actually know what's really working for you? So I think, you know, Deciem was lucky that it was formed with just young, hungry people who were naive, but naive in all like the best ways. Like I say now, like, part of our problem at Deciem is we've lost a lot of naivety because we know when we're going to get told off. Like, we know the way to do things. Whereas in the early days, we'd just be like, sorry, like we didn't know. We were just we were trying. But it's also really interesting because The Ordinary was the 11th brand we launched.
Right.
So actually, and you know, the other brands before The Ordinary, we still have Neod still out there,
yeah.
so we still have a couple of others, and the others we did retire, but they weren't failure. Well, nothing's a failure because you always learn. But I mean, they did okay. But back then we made the mistake of getting a listing too early, like into a retailer, when actually the demand wasn't there. And I remember when I had the privilege of meeting Leonard Lauder, like, one of the biggest advice he gave to us, he was like, you always have to make sure demand leads distribution. Like, your demand has to be ahead. Like, you need people to want you, and they can't quite get you yet.
Right.
And I think too often it happens the other way around. And actually, I think it is a good thing now with social media and like the way you can actually build demand for a brand. You can kind of test it, and then if consumers want it, you can then follow the distribution strategy afterwards, which I think is it's just much better. But yeah, it took us a lot of attempts, and, you know, we did a hair care brand, like we had a supplement brand. So we were trying in different fields. And again, it was interesting because The Ordinary, it came out of kind of frustration that we had Niod, which is one of our other skincare brands, which is really about like the next generation of skincare technologies. It's always evolving. It's always looking at new. Now, new doesn't mean better, because if you went into a pharmacy and you saw a painkiller, which was brand new, £100, you'd probably be like, why am I going to buy that? Because I know paracetamol works, it's safe, it's effective, and it's going to cost me like 50p. So new doesn't always mean better when there's actually something there, but also new is a way that you can kind of like look at different technologies. And actually we looked a lot into pharmacy to say all of these ingredients exist, and some of these ingredients have been around for decades. But just like paracetamol, it doesn't mean they're bad. Like, these are some of the most effective, trusted skincare ingredients out there. So actually, let's just make them transparent. Like, let's tell the consumer, like, this is the ingredient, this is the percentage. Let's make it accessibly priced, because the reality is those ingredients, there's no patents anymore because they've all expired, and therefore they can be manufactured anywhere, which means the cost prices come all the way down. Then we also had efficiencies. So you'll notice, like, most of our, you know, the packaging, like the glass bottles, they all share the same. So actually it's just a new label. So there were so many efficiencies we made through the production process too.
But interestingly, I think about that, it's an efficiency, but that's one of the great things about the brand. It gave the brand a look and a feel, that everything was uniform. But actually for you, it was an efficiency. That's really clever.
Well, and I find the aesthetics really interesting because, you know, it seems a very simple design, except simple, so complex. Like, I remember the creative team going through like, you'll never believe how many shades of white there are until you're trying to pick the Pantone for the white of the box, because actually, like, it makes such a difference. But actually the design, also the fact it was kind of it was, you know, we really believe The Ordinary is a brand for everyone. Like, there is a product. It doesn't matter, like, your age, your gender, like who you are, like, there's something for you. And again, I think before then, a lot of beauty brands were designed with an age group in mind, with a gender in mind. And actually that's not what skincare's about. Because again, we took a much more like this pharmaceutical approach and then applied it to skincare.
So Brandon at this time was, you were co-CEOs, would you call it yourselves that, really?
He was CEO and I was co-CEO. Yeah. And effectively, you know, Brandon, so he studied computer science. So he saw the world very much in black and white. Like, he was a kind of tech person. And interestingly, the reason he got into beauty was because during tech, he did a university scholarship in a big beauty company where he designed a software program where they could effectively see which ingredients would work and which wouldn't. And it was in there where he saw the cost price of some products, but he couldn't understand why, like, the margin on an eye cream was so much bigger than something like a facial cleanser. And he was kind of told, well, it's just marketing. It's like what the consumer wants to pay. And he was like, no, sure. Like, in his mind, it was, you know, this is the price, and then you add the markup and kind of the margin would be standard. When actually, like, you know, typically out there, an eye serum from most brands probably would have the highest thing because you've got such a small milliliter. Whereas actually even like cleansers are really hard because actually you've got such a big volume and it's got good ingredients in there. So actually just the size can really make a big difference in pricing. Yet the consumer's prepared to pay much more for an eye serum than they are for a cleanser. So there's actually like these nuances, which makes sense. But like when you're coming from a black and white world, you're like, that doesn't seem fair to the consumer. So that's kind of what spiked his interest really in coming into the beauty industry.
So that's interesting. He and you had a similar way of thinking from the get-go. You know, you're like, hang on a minute, I want to do this in a nice way. And he's thinking, hang on a minute, the consumer's getting ripped off here.
Yeah. And I feel like we've always put the consumer first. But like with Brandon, like he just had so much inner good. Like he wanted to make the world a better place and not be a scam. And, you know, I think it's what was a shame. I think there was a lot of people that were skeptical about skincare.
Yes.
And, you know, Brandon actually had a great quote around, you know, like aeroplanes fly in the sky. Like you think before that was possible, like it would blow your mind that someone would say that's possible. And like everyone accepts it because you can believe it. Yet, you know, people don't really think like a serum can improve their skin, even though actually that's like a much easier thing than making an airplane take people into the sky.
Yes. Oh my God, wait, you've just blown my mind a bit there. That's quite funny. I haven't really thought about that. So like somebody going, yes, planes can fly, and then somebody else going, this ingredient really does work in this serum. You think, whatever. I've got to say, I have been super cynical about skincare in the past. I was very like the people that you were referencing earlier.
Yeah.
It's funny that, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think because for so long, I think people did overpay.
Yes, and we were a bit angry about that.
Yeah, and I also think people were overpromised. So like one of the things that we were very, particularly in the early days, like we've kind of got into it a little bit more recently, but particularly in the early days, we didn't do before and afters. Like we tried to stay away from that because too often, and if we do like we always use our own people, like we don't use models, because I think people sell an unrealistic expectation, and like everyone's skin is different and it's going to react differently.
Yes.
And also like there's so much on like usage, consistency, like, you know, when you do a clinical trial, it's being used perfectly. That's not the reality at home when people forget one and like maybe they use too much, they don't use the right amount. So we always try to lead much more with like just the science and, you know, with the pricing of the ordinary. If someone spends £7 on a serum, like their expectations are already much lower.
Yes.
So then they see it works and they're like, wow, like that's really now working. I want to go and like layer up and kind of build my regime. Whereas when someone's spending £70, they're expecting the world because they're spending that. They're seeing like this gorgeous Hollywood actress,
like Christy Turlington.
Exactly, like they think that's going to be the outcome. So I think again, it was like just this new approach around like again just being more honest, being like this is good skincare. Like it's not going to change you, but like hopefully it will, like you'll see those improvements in your texture and like the things that we can address.
I'm excited because I'm going to introduce you to my new show sponsor, Ancient and Brave. I love a secret weapon. Well, this isn't really a secret because I've been banging on about it for years. It's collagen, and more specifically, Ancient and Brave True Collagen. It's been part of my routine for years, and it's completely tasteless, odorless, and dissolves in anything. Coffee, tea, smoothies, even just water. But this is why I swear by it. Collagen levels naturally decline as we get older. I know, it's so unfair. And that basically affects everything: skin, hair, joints, muscles, you name it. But True Collagen helps keep everything strong, supported, and glowing. But what really sets them apart is that they're a B Corp and members of the 1% for the planet, which means that 1%, actually now 2%, of all their sales goes directly to environmental causes that protect our planet. So if you fancy giving it a go, here's a little secret for you. Get 20% off your first order at ancientandbrave.earth/planet using my code BEGINAGAIN, all in one word. Starting something new can be a bit terrifying, can't it? Whether it's a business, a side hustle, or just finding the courage to share ideas online. The actual hardest part is often taking that first step. Our sponsor, Adobe Express, the quick and easy Create Anything app, turns "where do I begin" into "look what I just did." With customizable templates and powerful features like generative AI, it makes creating everything from social posts to presentations feel so simple. If 2025 is the year you're finally saying yes to your big ideas, in fact, let's say 2025 is the year you're saying yes to your big ideas, Adobe Express makes it so easy to just jump right in. And it's free, so no excuses. Head to adobe.com/UK/express or search in your phone's app store to give it a go. It's that easy. So obviously, Brandon is he sounds like a brilliant guy. He sounds like a maverick.
Yeah.
Really exciting and fun to be around. So when did you first start noticing that something was a bit off with him, and what changed?
So again, similar to my dad, he was very quick kind of towards the end. And, you know, I think there's an element of when you see like geniuses and entrepreneurs, like I think there are many who are potentially on like the spectrum, because I feel like their brains are, they're different.
They think differently, yeah.
They are just constantly thinking and pushing boundaries, and like their brain never switches off. So I feel like there's always this fine line between like, it's almost like between like genius and I don't know if it's insanity or like what that is, but like they kind of like balance this way through it, which is what makes them so special.
I think that's quite an interesting thing. I've always looked at people who were super clever as being in some way disadvantaged. That friends of mine who were very, very clever always struggled in some way. It sounds like Brandon had a slightly different type of mind.
Yeah, so Brandon's mind was like his knowledge of science. And, you know, he would drop me off at, 10 p.m. and he'd pick me up the next morning at 7 a.m. and he's already read like 10 papers on an ingredient and looked at this and this and I'm like, whoa, like I just went to sleep and woke up. So like that was his mind and like his level of understanding. And so he really was like the product development and kind of like he was that creative genius. Then I think I was the person where I was setting up the offices, doing the distribution, like looking after the team, like kind of building that side of it. So I think it was a good balance. And I think also because, again, Brandon probably some similarities to my dad, but like Brandon was the kind of person where people could always be scared of him. But it was interesting because I never felt that, but I felt it on behalf of the team.
Yes. Do you think that's because you're super honest? Because I always think that people, I worked at Models One when I was a teenager and my boss was quite scary, but he never was scary to me because if I messed up, I just go, I've messed up, can you help me? Yeah. Rather than try and hide your mess up because you're a bit scared. Yeah. And then he'd go, why have you hidden the mess up now? I can't help you. Yeah. That kind of thing.
I probably think, like the honesty, just the owning up. And I think the fact that I'm very calm and probably also like he knew, and not that anyone who makes mistakes means to, but like I always just approached everything with like doing my best. But you see with Brandon, like it's interesting because like the world's also changed a lot. And
yes,
I often say to like a few of the team members who, spend a lot of time with Brandon too, I'd love to see what he would be like in today's world. Like he was a workaholic. And I remember at one point, so in Canada, the standard time off you get is 10 days, like 2 weeks.
It's crazy in America, isn't it? In Canada, it's like the
oh my gosh, I'm like, how do you live for 2 weeks holiday a year?
Maternity leave is what? How long?
Like 3 months.
3 months.
Canada's better for that. Sorry, US is that, but yeah, the like legal standard for holiday is 10 days a year.
Mad.
But I remember being in Brandon's office and our HR person came in and she was like, someone's like asking for more holiday. And he's like, who is asking for more time off? Because he was, just this, like, which you get in a startup, like everyone. And again, like, I think we were fortunate that like back then, like most of us, we didn't have families. We were all in our 20s and we lived it, breathed it. Like, we wanted to work the evenings and weekends because we were all so engaged. And also like everyone had options in the company. So everyone kind of felt like they owned it and everyone knew we were like building this together and like this is so exciting. And I'd see things like that, so like people were kind of like, or if he saw something he didn't like, he'd be like, who designed this? And you'd see everyone like, they're like, yeah, I'm like, you can't be like that. So I feel like I was always kind of the, it's kind of like them probably playing the role of my mum of just being like calming things, smoothing things, kind of playing the mediator in some roles.
Did you ever moot the idea with him about having some time off, or could you see him burning out a bit? Or
you see, it's interesting with burnout, and I think in general actually like the work-life balance, and again I think one thing that I'm always respectful for is like everyone chooses what works for them for work-life balance. And for me, like I would have hated to work my 20s in somewhere that was 9 till 5 because actually like I don't have that many hobbies. Like for me, like I loved it. Like, when you're so passionate about something, like I want to live and breathe it every day. And it's interesting because now kind of where we are now with Deciem, and like, I know who I'm talking to. So like some of those early team members, and now like, we all, because we're all the same age, we all have kids, like we've kind of gone through like the life stages together. That, for example, like I've always loved the flexibility that if my kids are in bed and Sean's out and I'm at home, like I want to work because actually if that means that then the next day I'll take Luca to a swimming lesson and I'll have like the time off when it matters to me. So I feel like balance can be a really good thing if it works for you. And I also have a lot of respect for the people who are like, I want to work 9 till 5 and switch off and actually don't come to me, don't communicate, I don't want to think about it. But Brandon's someone like his everything was work. And actually one of the things that I knew we were like his family, but the thing that really hit me was when he passed away and then we saw his will. Every single person in there was a Deciem employee. And that is how much of a family it was. So like when, people say...
Did you guys not know that?
No, I'd never seen. I mean, but I guess like I also... Really... But it didn't surprise me because I knew like we were his life. Like, and again, it's so hard to explain because when I talk about it, it sounds like a cult, and it was. But like, I was happy to be in the cult. Like, we were like...
I think I've heard Stephen say this. I think a business... I mean, I'm using like the word cult obviously is not a very positive one, but it's got to be a team, but that's so tight and so together and so supportive of each other that I get that. But there's something, it's really interesting learning something about someone after they've died.
Yeah.
And from a will. So what you're saying, it was mostly work people, not family.
But you see, we were his family.
Yeah. But did he have family?
It was complicated. Like his mum passed away. His father was still like, but he wasn't close to any of his family. But again, what was interesting was a lot of stuff I learned. It's so strange because I felt like I was like, we were best friends and we were. And like, when you know someone, but then you don't know them, but you still know them. And just to give you examples, like I didn't know he had a partner. Now, and like we've been like 8 years of like inseparable together, and I'd go to, we'd be traveling, we'd always be together, and like he would never, I feel like in the early few months, you'd maybe like try about like, oh, you dating, and there'd be no, and then there was just never any conversation after then. So I kind of just assumed, like
he'd tell you if he'd met someone, or
he's kind of just on his own or whatever. But he'd actually had a partner who worked at Deciem. But I didn't even know this because I was just kind of, I don't know, you don't question, I guess, like when you have that.
Why didn't he tell you?
Because I don't think he wanted to discuss his sexuality. And you see, he was from Iran, where actually like being gay isn't really something that's accepted. And I think it's something that one of the things, and I actually feel like this is very topical at the moment because I can't believe how many companies are getting rid of like DE&I, diversity, equity and inclusion.
Yes.
Because for me, like it was something the world had actually made progress with. And when I look a lot about what happened with Brandon, I think pre-Deciem, I think the world had made him feel like he didn't belong. Like he couldn't ever be who he truly was.
Yes.
And maybe that's because of childhood, like growing up in a country where like something wasn't accepted had made him feel that way. So when I look at Deciem, we are the most diverse company I think you would ever meet, which I love. And I think also a lot of that was probably, Brandon's push in the early days. Like, it wasn't even an active push, but like I just look back and I'm like, gosh, like we are such a beautiful just blend of humans where, and like we always say as a company, our North Star's belonging. Like for us, the most important thing is that any of our team can just come and be who they are and show up. And I find like that is what's so nice about humans, like having different experiences, different people, all being human. And the fact that companies are starting to move away from something, which I feel like was actually good progress, just feels a bit sad. And because I think it will lead more people like how Brandon felt, that like he couldn't be himself, like he couldn't show up.
What's sad about Brandon is what I'm seeing is a man who was nearing on genius level, amazing interpersonal skills, a great businessman, full of energy, loved life, but had a relationship with somebody at work that he couldn't tell anybody about, that he couldn't show. I wonder how much tension that brought to his partner, between him, like, why can't we be out at the office? Why can't we? I don't know whether that would have happened. That you didn't know something, that he couldn't open himself up fully to you. that's not being yourself, I would say, is the biggest weight in the world to carry, isn't it?
And especially because, like, hopefully you'll realize this, but like, I feel like I'm the most open, loving person to any human. So,
why couldn't you
it's
tell
not
me?
even like he had to hide it from someone who maybe he would think would have like a different opinion of anything other than acceptance. But I also think it's hard maybe once you just keep going. And it's not even like he was living a lie. I don't know, maybe he was, but I think at some point it probably all just is going to take its toll on your brain.
Of course.
To kind of be living that way for so long. But you see the other thing, and like the thing with Brandon, again, like when it comes down to brains, like it's so hard to diagnose like what happened, like the chicken and the egg, kind of how it all came together. But towards the end of 2017, and so again, remember we started Deciem 2013. The Ordinary launched at the end of 2016.
So it was going mad.
So like,
I mean, from the get-go, The Ordinary just went bang, right?
It
so
exploded
it had gone
in the
crazy
best
at
possible
Deciem.
way. So towards the end of 2017, Brandon had, again, like I think this is again maybe another common theme, I think, and this kind of level of genius is with like high brain activity. He got intrigued by drugs, but by this I'm talking about magic mushrooms, because this is something where it's kind of like it's to do with the brain, it's to do with creativity, it's about actually how can I kind of explore different parts of my brain. And again, like until this point, you know, with Brandon, he didn't even drink alcohol. Like he was a Diet Coke, French fries, just kind of a
so he'd never experimented with drugs or alcohol or anything.
I mean, he'd have like
How
an
old was
occasional
he at
glass
this
of wine.
point?
Like he was like 10 years older than me, so like early 30s.
Wow.
You know, he'd have a glass of wine if we were at supplier dinner, and like he felt like he had to, but never from choice. Like he'd always just prefer a Diet Coke. So anyway, it was, but again, like he wanted to go to Amsterdam to do it where it was legal. So like he was a maverick in many ways, but he also didn't want to like break the rules or get in trouble. So he wanted to go to like Amsterdam and just kind of explore the idea of your brain. So I feel like it started very innocently, which I think it often can do.
Did you notice a difference in him after the first time that he took that? Did he have a psychotic episode that first time on psilocybin, or was it something that built?
It's a difficult one because like I saw changes, but not in a, so like, and this is just a silly example, like, but he became vegan, and like it was just things where like, and that's not to say, I don't know, there were like changes where he'd been quite consistent in the way he was. So I could tell like things were changing in his brain, but nothing from like a worrying perspective.
Right.
But the thing with Brandon, you know, his whole brain was addictive, but in the best possible, like when I say he dropped me off and he just spent the whole night researching something, like he was addicted to work, to subjects, to like,
get into something and just go forensic.
Like, in the best way that like I think makes an entrepreneur and kind of makes that type of person. But obviously the downside of that is when your personality is like that and you're doing it with an addictive substance, then I think that kind of path starts to unwind. So I feel like this kind of all started the last couple of months of 2017. And also within this, so we just got investment from Estee Lauder companies, and like it just felt like something's really going to happen here. So we kind of just got this investment, and obviously this then happened with Brandon. So then it was over the Christmas period, and he wanted to go and just kind of explore, and he told me he was going to like go to some extremes, because again
what does that look like?
The amount of what he was taking.
Oh, okay. So that's also interesting. So he's gone from trying it a bit, and then he's like, okay, I'm going full whack.
Yeah. But again, like it was coming from a good intention.
Oh, so I get what you're saying. What he's trying to do is to
be superhuman.
It open his mind.
Yeah.
Not escape something.
No.
He's not escaping a bad life or a trauma or...
No.
He's... Right, okay.
And that's what like... It came... And not like taking drugs isn't... But like... It was coming from like a good heart of like... He just wanted to like be better. Be
Make
more
himself
creative.
better.
Like kind of have these new thoughts and stuff.
Do you know why I think this is quite good to talk about? Because we've talked about psilocybin a little bit on this podcast already, and about quite a bit about the benefits. I've talked to Professor David Nutt about that, and I talked to a wonderful woman about taking it, and it helped her realize that she wanted to help women and But we haven't discussed what happens when you are someone who is maybe a bit vulnerable mentally to something, and you start thinking that you would love to take enormous amounts because you've got one of those brains that kind of is vulnerable but also adaptive, but also you love that kind of deep thought, but then there's an edge, isn't there? There's a point.
Yeah. And I think it is so true because, again, like out of all the drugs, it feels like they get celebrated. And like, of course, there is so much research and like there are likely benefits of like the microdosing. But if someone's an extreme personality and it goes to the extreme, then things change and things happen. So that was kind of the new year. And overnight, it was an entirely different person he became. And I remember I was in Australia. Me and my husband, we'd gone to Australia and New Zealand for Christmas and New Year. And then because I had meetings there in the beginning of January. And I remember it was like January 2nd. And he was just like, go straight to the airport. Go and buy a first class flight. It doesn't matter how much it costs. Go to the airport. He was like, just get your passport. Just leave everything else. Like, it doesn't matter. Turn your emails off. Like, we're going to slow down and just meet me in Toronto. And I'm someone, I'm like, okay, but I'm in hot weather. You're like, I need to just sort things. And you know, we've always been frugal. And now you're telling me to just go and book a first class ticket.
And did he sound normal?
No.
Okay.
Like, I instantly knew it.
You knew?
It changed. And it is interesting because even though like I can't really put my finger on any like specific examples before, I'd actually been getting headaches, which I never do. And I think it was like stress headaches of just knowing something was changing. And again, like I'm someone who's like, you know, never even smoked weed. Like haven't done that well. So for me, I'm like, oh gosh, like drugs are scary.
Was he taking any other drugs at the same time?
No.
Nothing, just the psilocybin?
Just this at this point. And when I got to Toronto, it's like he'd gone.
Yeah.
He was like this cold, like he was so warm, like, oh, like he'd be there at the airport to pick me up. He'd open the car door. You know, he was just someone who was just like so good, so warm. He cared so much about like his team. Because like I said, like the Deciem team, like we were family. We went through everything together. Like, so to suddenly be with someone when it was like this coldness. But then again, he'd start to say things where, you know, he was like, we don't need time anymore. Like, we'll just say, I'll meet you in the morning in a coffee shop and we'll just bump into each other. Like, let's not let time. And I'm like, okay, but what time are you going to be there, you know? And then like you said about phones, like he was going to get rid of his phone because we don't need phones. It's too much communication. And he's saying things where, because he's such a genius. And I remember like ringing Sean being like, gosh, like he's saying these things like.
And Sean's your husband?
My husband. I'm like, is it just next level genius of like, you know, because you try and keep up with someone's thinking in this way. And then you're like, no, actually, like, that doesn't make sense. Of course we need time. Like, how can we get by if we don't have time? So you're kind of like trying to balance this just because I've never seen a human change so quickly.
What would you call it? A psychotic break, or where someone's literally just gone?
It's like he'd left his body. He was cold. It was like he was vacant. And it was just so difficult to understand what had happened. And then, I mean, everyone was petrified because, one, it's scary seeing someone you love like this. But then again, this is someone who is very powerful, can like have outbursts, can raise his voice. So you're having all of these mixed emotions. And you know, he summoned a few of us to one of our stores in Toronto, which is when he said, you know, like the company's growing too fast, like we should slow down. But again, like we'd kind of done everything together. And then suddenly it was kind of just this like, he was like, I'm decided this and we're going to stop this and do all these changes.
Oh, and you'd always been a team.
Yeah, together. So I was like, okay, this is strange, but like I have to kind of just figure out how to get through this. And then like the next few months, it was just like so insane how someone, it changed, and it was all on Instagram. It was very public. And so in the middle of February, so this was kind of 5 or 6 weeks, and we had done a brand partnership with someone, and he cancelled it on Instagram without even telling this person that their brand had just like ended. So I was just like, that's like really hurting people now. So, and I was like, oh,
and
you
that's
okay?
so
Like,
not what you are about. Yeah.
Like, you can't. I'm all up for doing things in a new way and like being disruptive, but like there's also just respect and kindness that like are values that we should never really compromise on. So I kind of I said, look, like something, and it's strange because until then, like I'd been too scared to even address with him that like something was wrong, because like even I was fearful of just like not really understanding how much change had happened. And again, maybe like being so in awe of someone's genius that you're kind of so like, gosh, like, is this...
Maybe this is a plan.
Yeah, maybe like this is the goodness.
Yeah.
And yeah, you still see sparks of that within there. But I think the kindness is really what had gone, which was a big shock. So then he fired me in the February because effectively I'd started to be like, things aren't okay. Which again, like he wasn't allowed to do that without like everyone else being involved. But I was like, okay, I'm just out of the situation, which is maybe like a good thing for a little bit. And again, like I'd married my husband like a couple of years before, but I'd always, because I was working so crazy, I was like we can wait like a little bit longer until we have children. So at this point I was like, okay, I'm out. So actually I really want a child. So like, let's just try and have a baby. So we were like super lucky that it happened like more or less straight away. So I fell pregnant. So then I was suddenly in like, my personality is two parts. I'm either like, I do a day of work and I'm like, I want this career and I want to do businesses, and then I'll be at like a church playgroup singing Hop Little Bunny, Hop Hop with my child, and I'm like, I want to be a stay-at-home mum. Like I'm like both extremes.
I was exactly the same. I was either just work non-stop or I don't ever want to work again.
Yeah, but I feel like each day I'm like, depending which day it is.
Yeah, that's so funny. I bet lots of mums relate to that.
Yeah, and like, it's such a small period of your life. So
and it's such a small period of their lives too, where they're really little.
I know. So I was like, hey, we're going to have a baby. So got pregnant and we like went away. We went to like Ibiza for a couple of months. But then, and again, in this time, like it's difficult because I'm seeing everything play out, and like the team is still every single day, like we're in contact. And I'm seeing how bad things are getting, but like it's difficult. Like everyone was powerless. Like the best thing everyone could do was just try and do their role in as quiet way as possible.
Going quietly.
Yeah, but it's difficult when everything was so publicly played out. So then, so I fell pregnant late March, and then in the maybe like end of April, early May, like I just remember like Brandon ringing me. He was crying. He was like begging me to come back, and just feeling like, because again, this is someone I love, like, and this isn't just a colleague. This is someone who like I see as like a best friend, and we've been through so much. So I was like, okay, I don't know if I can help, but I can't do anything on the outside. So at least let me go back and see like what I could do. And in my head, I was like, our baby's due at the end of December. So I've got the easiest get out. If it doesn't work and I can't do anything, then like I've got something else to look forward to. But even that, you see, I told Brandon quite early on I was pregnant, because he was also like, there was Instagram posts, he would tag whoever, there'd be lawyers, it'd just be like this kind of crazy world. And again, knowing what he was, a good human he was, I was like, look, if I just tell him like, look, I'm pregnant, I'm kind of just out of this now. But then he posted on Instagram that I was pregnant when I was like 8 weeks pregnant, and we hadn't even told anyone. But even like that is something that isn't him. Yeah. So it's so difficult to even explain. Yeah. And like naivety on my side to even think but again, like, because you just hope the person's in there, that you hope that actually like
you might respect
that love
that
will be
and
like
understand.
Actually like yeah.
Were you devastated?
I don't know if devastated, but like I was devastated by the situation.
By him and his...
But even in that, like he was so much like, I was pregnant, I was happy, I had a husband, I had a life. Like, okay, I didn't want it on Instagram before we told anyone, but when someone else is suffering so much, all I cared about was kind of like him and the team, and like just this crisis that we were in.
Can I also just point out something that I'm seeing at the moment is that you had this idyllic meeting with him, starting the businesses, really exciting, everybody in the same loving environment, Deciem, caring, kind, maverick beginners. Then suddenly the ordinary, Estee Lauder, mega, everything.
Yeah.
Then the stress that started at that point. And I always think when you're carrying a baby, you become a different person because you are safeguarding someone else's life inside your life. And the amount of stress that must have been landing on you, even though you're happy and you've got your husband, but this must have been an incredibly hard time for you while you are making a baby.
Yeah. And it's weird because like I didn't feel it because I think I was worried more about Brandon and the team and the situation we were in. And almost I was very busy because it was kind of like, gosh, like, what are we going to do? Because again, like, not only was this happening, but the ordinary was going like this. Because even though this chaos was there, like the brand...
So it hadn't affected the business?
The business was exploding almost because of it. Because again, like it was news.
Publicity.
It was publicity. Like people were talking like, have you seen this on Instagram? Have you seen this brand? Have you seen this founder? Like people were like watching it unfold. But they were also like, they make amazing skincare. Like, have you tried? So
that's so nuts, isn't it?
Yeah. So then you have like your scaling, like it, and like so we do all of our own manufacturing. We're building a new factory. Like you're trying to like do all of this. And again, I think maybe what helped at times was like Brandon was traveling a lot. So actually I think there was like big periods of time where like he wasn't seeing the team that often. And we were lucky that we also had some really strong people in the business who were kind of like carrying it through. Because again, I think we were lucky because we had the history with Brandon that like, he was like, you know, everyone loved him. And, you know, you feel sorry for someone when they're in this situation.
So you were all giving him a bit of slack.
Yeah.
And then at what point did it escalate to the point where you thought, okay, this isn't okay anymore? Were you all still hoping he's going to come back?
Yeah. Well, I remember the first time. So he posted this on Instagram. Like he would post from like when he was sectioned in like different hospitals and like
he was getting sectioned. Yeah.
And I remember the first time it happened, we were all relieved because you're like, okay, this is the turning point. Like he's going to get the help and like you have that hope. And then he was out 5 days later, but he was out feeling like, see, told you I'm like, there's nothing wrong with me because they've let me go. And it almost made it worse.
Yes.
And then it was this cycle. And I think what was difficult was I think the drugs escalated into like then trying, because again, like, and I say this as someone who's always kind of been too scared of drugs to get in. But I feel like when you have a feeling and you see that you can do things with your brain, I suspect it like can make you be like, I want to try a new thing. And it's like a spiral.
This addiction, you know.
That can go. And so kind of it was all getting worse. And that's what I say when I find it very difficult. And I'm not a doctor and obviously that was his health, but to really know which bits were drugs, which bits were mental health and actually just the correlation between the two, because I think they both just spiral each other.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I've had friends with mental health issues and they've got a drug problem, it's like fuel to the fire. It's terrible. What kind of additional drugs was he doing?
So he spoke about, like, I wasn't there, so I didn't see to know, but he spoke on emails and on Instagram about things like taking crystal meth. So I think... God.
So that's the worst of the
exactly,
worst.
And I think there was probably things in between, but when he started writing about that, it was kind of like, oh gosh, like...
game over. I mean, that's a really, really dark place to go. So if that's happening, that must have created the end quite quickly, no?
Well, so the end came, and like I have to say, throughout this whole period, like even the support we had from like the Estee Lauder companies, like the investors, like everyone was just because everyone loved him. Everyone was just like, we just want him to get better. But no one knows how to act in those situations. And especially, it's like a new dynamic when it's all playing out on Instagram and social. And any email you send, any conversation will be posted. Like, he'd be posting like the paramedics chasing him. Like, it was just, everything was being played out publicly, which then gives you just as humans another level of fear, because you kind of don't necessarily, when you're thinking about helping, it puts another thing behind you, because you're like, okay, if I do this, I'm probably going to get publicly attacked by him on social, which, whilst many people can see what's happening, you have comments, you're putting yourself into a situation that you don't necessarily,
which is quite possibly what he wanted. I can't get attacked because they know I'll post it.
We were all we were all scared. So then in early October, so really kind of just 9 months in, he shut down the whole company, and he basically said the stores are all shutting, the factories, and so like that was the point when then everyone had to step in. So then a court order was applied to remove him. Now it was a temporary court order. Like, the point was like, he needs to just be removed for now so the company can survive, because again, we had 1,500 employees. Like, it's a lot of people relying on livelihoods, on being paid. And I think as well, you struggle with, we've shown him love. We've shown him, like, you've tried all of these different angles. And
it's an intervention of sorts, isn't it?
You have to reach rock bottom. So you're like, okay, maybe that will be the trigger to wanting to get better. And sadly, it never was. Like, he never made it back. And I think that's one of the things that I struggle with, because knowing how much we were his family, I hate the feeling that was taken away from him. And like, already he must have been so lonely, so scared. And actually that mixture of it being work and like your best friends and everything in one, it can be good in many ways, but actually when it goes wrong, I don't know, I feel so sad. And then so that was in October. So then obviously that's when I got made sole CEO, and I was 7 months pregnant at that point.
Oh my God.
So I'd gone from thinking like,
that's crazy,
I wouldn't have kids until I stopped working and would like have all this time, to then kind of being in this crisis situation. But also just like,
it's double the work now.
Never any doubt, because it was kind of like, look, we have to survive this, because also we're protecting it for Brandon. Like, we all thought he would get better. Like, I don't think anyone ever thought it would end, and again, like, end so quickly.
So yes, you will want to make it work so it's there for him when he comes back. God. I can't believe the stress. I mean, I know you say you weren't stressed because you just had to do it, but still, that is difficult emotionally. It's not that. It's more the emotional weight of what was happening on you. Yeah,
it was the emotional, and I think the one thing I felt was almost this. It was like the 24/7 anxiety of not knowing the next phone call, the next email, the next post, like the next. Where is he? Like, what's like? Is he safe? What's he doing? So that was really hard. And then in January he passed away, and it's difficult to even know. Like, no one was there that night to know what happened.
Where was he?
He was at his home in Toronto, in his condo, and he came over the balcony. Now, it's difficult to know. Like, I do not believe for a second that that was suicide that night, because he had too much to say. Like, he always had 10 words for one. And especially in that moment, like, if it was, he'd have written an email, he'd have done a video, like, he would have marked his last moments. So I very much don't believe he intended to take his life that night. Whether he had substances and he thought he could fly, or, he was very, like, maybe sat on the balcony. It was just such a windy night in Toronto. Like, it took him off balance. Like, no one knows anything other than, like, he was on his own and he came over the balcony. But you see, I also sometimes wonder, I find it interesting because the last time he updated his will was at the end of 2017. So, like, just before he started this journey. And again, I think, like, was it a long suicide in terms of a choice of, like, actually the ordinary was getting big, and like a big business is stressful. Like, because again, like he was the genius of creativity, formulations. Like, I can't even say enough words about what a genius he was. But he didn't like the headaches of people, a big organization, you know, forecasting, like all of the things that naturally come with growing. Maybe like hiding who he was for so long. Like, I don't know, sometimes I wonder, like, was it an out? But again, like, I generally do think it just started with a exploring creativity.
Is it really hard after someone's gone, the how, the why?
So I think for me, like, one of the things, and I feel like in many ways I still haven't stopped to process a lot of it. So when Brandon passed away, like, my daughter Mila was 3 weeks old. So she was 3 weeks old. Brandon had gone. The company had just been through chaos, as well as like growing. And I think it was so busy. Like, Mila went to Toronto when she was 4 weeks old, because we obviously went to saw Brandon's funeral. And then, like, her first year of life, she was in Toronto once a month. Like, my mum would come. And I feel like because life was so busy, you kind of never stop to actually really think through what happened. And actually, I'm grateful, because I think for me, that was probably the best way to deal with grief, was actually just being busy. Because again, like, I can't diagnose what was wrong with mental health. Like, I didn't know all the drugs he did. Like, no one knows that but him. Well, and even he probably didn't know exactly what was happening in his brain. So all you can do is really go on, like, your experience, what you've seen, what you've felt. But it's just, I just find it so sad. Because I'm like, well, with him and my dad, I'm like, what a bloody waste of life. Like, for two people that just had so much personality, so much character, had so much more to give. And to both die at such a young age. Like, my dad was 48, Brandon was 41. I'm like, that's nothing. Like, you're not even halfway through, like, life. But then I'm also like, I think they both probably had more suffering than I could ever imagine or ever know in their brains. And actually getting up and dealing with that on a daily basis, particularly in a world where it wasn't as open about mental health. And I actually think another thing, and I say this with no science or any knowledge, but I actually think I think some people really severely suffer. Like, I'm trying to say that I think we need a term where we all have mental health. Like, we all have brains, we all have how we're feeling. But I think the people that are really struggling, we need to be careful that in a way we don't dilute the term mental health, because actually for people where it's so severe, like, it needs a different type of acceptance. And like, as a society, as a world, like, we're still not ready to treat it. Like, I remember my dad, like, we couldn't get him into a rehab because he didn't want to. And we didn't have any control on that. Like, Brandon got a few times, it was like there, but like, he was straight out as soon as he could. Like, and I don't know what the answer is, because obviously we're also great that we're in a world where we have freedom and free will. So I don't really know what the answers are yet, but I feel like there's still a lot more to really understand the brain health, because I think if it's not dealt with, then when you maybe do reach this point and maybe an addiction or something comes into your life, like, it is just the end.
It is quite interesting how the two, I mean, obviously apart from Sean, but the two biggest male figures in your life both came to addiction later.
Yeah.
And it went very quickly, 0 to 60, and neither of them were prepared to stop. Or not prepared, but had the desire to stop, even though they could see the carnage unfolding around them.
But you see, I also think they were both proud people. And I don't know how they would have felt. Like, I think it must be so hard to be in that space and like acting in a different way to who you had been. And I don't know, like, coming out of it, and like, especially for like Brandon, when everything was out on Instagram and then it was on YouTube, it was on TikTok. Like, I feel like that's a lot to like then, I don't know, like come out of that cycle and see everything where maybe you weren't. I don't know how that you deal with that.
Yeah, and it's I mean, being a former addict myself, I'm always fascinated by how come I wanted to get clean and how come so many of my friends didn't, and what is the thing? I'm not sure about tough love anymore. Do you know Johann Hari?
Yeah.
I'm going to send you his book.
Okay.
Well, I met him because he wrote a book about addiction and how to help addicts, and it triggered me in an enormous way, because I was like, God, this is sort of not anything that I've known or learnt through getting clean, but I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
But I feel so frustrated for you and your loss of these two giants in your life and how annoying it is. So I'm going to turn it on its head, I think, a little bit. And I'm going to ask you what you've learned. What have you taken from losing these two men in your life? And how can you make something good out of that?
So I'll tell you what I've learned, and then also what I haven't learned, what I would still like to learn. So I think what I've learned is, I think one thing is around with my dad and Brandon, like I'm so aware of the people suffering around. And I think actually one of the things, since I've spoken a little bit about this topic, was the amount of people that reached out and who are the family of someone suffering. And I think they need support too. And I think they often aren't, because again, there's still a little bit of a stigma around when it is addiction. People think it's a choice. And whilst the first time may have been a choice, eventually it's not a choice and it is an addiction. But I think, like, I guess I've learned that, I guess it's made me who I am in terms of, like, I'm fiercely independent. Like, I'm probably a bit of a control freak, because I think in areas when you can't control things, you're then like, I need to control what I can control.
Yes.
But what I haven't learned, and which is something that I really want to learn more on, I hate this feeling that if I was in this situation again, which fingers crossed I never am, I don't know what you can do differently.
Yes.
I don't know at which point. Is it the signs? Is it the signals? Because no one actually has much advice. And actually, most of the advice is that there's so little you can do for that person. And everyone, like, I remember, like, with Brandon, everyone kept saying, like, you just have to wait for them to reach rock bottom. But, like, sometimes that never actually comes.
Well, sometimes rock bottom is death. And then it's too late. And I think sometimes people try and speed up rock bottom by doing something awful or cruel. And sometimes that can feel like a really difficult thing too. So it's very hard for families to understand. But I think the problem is somebody has to want to get clean. And what is going to be the thing that triggers them to want to do that? And you don't know, and you might never know. And so you can't trigger them to get clean. They are on their own, and only they can do better. But I will, for anybody watching this or listening to it, post somewhere all the Instagram accounts and email accounts for all the anonymous fellowships that do help families. So Al-Anon is for relatives of alcoholics, and there's a gambling one, there's a drug one, Nar-Anon. So we can definitely try and help support families, because even if someone's died, if you were a relative or a friend of somebody that had a problem, you can go and talk about your experiences with lots of other people who've gone through the same thing as you. And I think that is fantastically supportive. I think one of the problems that I feel like Brandon had was that he didn't have anyone.
Yeah.
And that's what you found out kind of after he died.
Yeah.
How few people he had around him.
Yeah.
You didn't really know him, but you knew him so well.
Yeah. But, like, he was someone, though, that had so much love in him. And I think he lost his mum when he was young, which I think, like, would have had a big impact. And just, and again, like, I do think for Brandon, it really comes to, like, growing up and not feeling like you can be yourself or that you belong, I think must be like the hardest thing to overcome. And if you're broken in that way, I don't know what it would take to repair.
But holding that kind of weight or that kind of secret, like you said, would be devastating.
And again, like I think it's something where, like for me, like family is just so important.
Yes.
And I think for someone to not really have that feeling of family must just be like incredibly hard in life.
I mean, you have learned, this podcast is called Begin Again, and you've done that again and again and again, been fired and sort of thought, right, I'm going to be this person, I'm going to start a family, then gone back, started again on that, then learnt how to be a parent and working so hard, which is another begin again. And now, where are you at? Like, you're still involved with Deciem, but to what level and what's next?
Yeah. So at the end of last year, I stepped down as CEO, and that was something where I didn't want to work as hard as I had been. And, I feel lucky and privileged that, through everything we've built and, when it's been like 12 years, you're like, actually, it is time for me to step back a little bit more. And also, like, I think I'm quick to recognize when I'm the right person for the role and when I'm not the right person for the role. And, Deciem has grown to be the most phenomenal company. But I was very lucky that, I went to Estee Lauder, I asked for help. We brought in an incredible general manager, Jesper, who actually is 10 times better at me at running the business. Because, when you get bigger, like your supply chain, like there are so many different things. And the reality is, and one thing that I still wish I could change more, but like those big jobs, like there's a big commitment and there's a big responsibility. There's so much travel, and it's hard to do that if you also want to be a present mum, which is kind of what I also wanted to be. So it's like, actually, it's just time for a change. And again, like I was grateful for the support from Stefan, who's the new CEO of Estee Lauder Companies, who's just like amazing and so supportive. But I was like, I want to kind of give up the responsibility and a lot of the work, but like, I'm not ready yet to give up the people, because when I say and again, I don't like it when all companies say family, but like there are so many of us, because again, you think what we went through, like resilience, like a team that goes through trauma, like you bond like no other. And like it is like another child. So, I'm in a role now where like I'm still involved as co-founder, where, I'll be involved in like brand direction, advice, like doing the people stuff, doing some kind of PR, telling our story. But it means I don't have to do the day-to-day now. Like I don't have to like do the calls on forecast, supply chain, and all of these other things that come with that role, which for me is like this perfect balance now of like I want to be at the pickup every day. Like, I want to do all of those things with my kids and kind of be there. And then I also want to like start looking at some new projects, because I think for me, like it is this balance of, I like being hyper-focused mum for half the week, but then I also like to have like other interesting things, meet interesting people, do stuff. So for me, it's kind of looking at what that looks like in the next few months.
So might I be interviewing you again in a few years about your next absolutely mega business? That would be quite good, wouldn't it?
That would be cool.
Oh my God, how exciting.
I feel like I'm always like, oh gosh, like we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. But again, like life's different, and you also want different things. And I'm so happy that I kind of did what I did in my 20s. But I also read a thing the other day about someone saying that they never see a relaxed woman. And it really got to me, because I was like, actually, women are all like, because we're always so busy, like we're being a mum, like we're doing all of these things, but then they see relaxed men. So I was also like, I want to be a relaxed woman too. So I actually like planning these times in and actually making sure that you just take time to actually do other things you enjoy.
I heard you say that. And you were talking about, when you're saying about a relaxed man, like a guy will go and play golf or have a hobby or something. I don't have a hobby. I've talked about this before. And you don't really have a hobby. Your hobby was work or being with the kids.
Yeah.
And then my kids have grown up. Now my hobby's just work. And I've started playing the piano again. I've started singing. I'm trying to do other things for me.
Yeah.
Because I didn't do it for 23 years.
But again, like I think that's one of the great things about life, that like when I was like looking at all your fitness stuff, and I'm like, and by the way, I actually remember probably being about 8 years old and like doing the Davina with my mum on the TV. But you know, like I'm like, gosh, like I want your figure, like I want to do that. But you know, and I'm like, gosh, once the kids are at school, like you've got time. Like you have to pick. And at the moment, for me, like any free time I have, like if the kids aren't at school, like I want to be with them. Like when the kids are at school, like that's the time, and then I'll like do work and stuff and like pick other things. But again, like you don't have to be everything in one period. Like if you have kids or you have a dependent parent or someone, like that takes so much time from you that like it is okay to not do it all, because you're going to have another chapter where you are going to be, and like me and Sean talk about holidays, and at the moment we're like, hey, like where will the kids be? Because there's no point in us going for like long lunches wanting to read a book. Like we have 2 young children, like that isn't our holiday at the moment. But in another 20 years time we will be like probably bored on the beach reading books. So one thing is like my brain doesn't switch off, and like that's the thing that I've learned about, like my husband's always like, you just need to go relax. But I'm like, if I have a massage, I'm like, okay, when's this done? Because I've got like things to do. The one thing that I've started learning in the last few years, which I really love, is skiing. Because I didn't ski growing up. I didn't grow up in a ski family, but I really want my kids to. So anyway, I like started having lessons, but I love it because actually, like, do you ski at all?
I skied a little bit when I was little with my mum, but it was kind of mad. And I have done it a couple of times as I got older, but my partner loves skiing. I've got to be honest, I am terrified of injury, and I don't bounce anymore. I mean, you're at an age where you still bounce. Do you love it?
I love it because like I say I love it, like I'm still like mainly on green slopes and stuff, which is just
great, but that's nice.
But I'm like, I can't check my phone. Like all I'm thinking is about like parallel, or like how I'm getting down, and like the fresh air being out. Like, you know, Mila, our 6-year-old's like skiing with us now. So I feel like, you know, when you start to find something which actually like is a way to relax for me. But it's finding those things because like, I feel like my brain is active, and like, I know not anywhere near to the level of Brandon, but I don't switch off. Like I think about things all the time, and you know, I'm lucky my husband's an entrepreneur too. He's got his own business.
It's quite nice. So you're in the same
It's great,
field.
but it's also a nightmare because like we'll both be together and be like, oh, like we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. Like he's bought the village pubs, and then I'm like, oh gosh, we do not need any more projects. But like you kind of can't stop yourself. And then again, like I go back to this, like, oh, like I want my kids to see a relaxed woman. But then I'm like, it's okay not to be relaxed as long as you're having fun and like enjoying what you do, loving life. What you do. And I think for me, the only thing I've ever craved in life is freedom. Like freedom just to like do what I want to do, like on my terms, buy what I want, go where I want. And for me, that's what everything to life was building up to. And again, part of this chapter of like giving up the CEO responsibility, but doing this is again just like a bit more freedom now, where, you know, like being a CEO for a big company, like it's a lot of weight on your shoulders. Like, and I still feel responsible still in my role, but it's slightly different. So yeah, I feel very happy about the next chapter.
One last thing I want to ask you is that I do feel like you have bossed being a mum, and that you are balanced and you have a good outlook on it. Have you got any advice or help? I mean, advice I would say for companies that are starting, that are trying to provide a friendly, welcoming, inclusive place for parents to work, because I think when you become a parent, everything changes. I loved working. I had a baby. I looked at this baby and I went, oh my God, where's my ambition gone? And then as they've got older, I've really started to love working again because they don't want to be with me or need to be with me all the time. How can companies support parents? And how can you manage you wanting to work and be a parent? What are the best things to do?
So actually, like the one thing I'm so grateful for, so when I had Mila, so we had Stephen Kaplan was our COO. An incredible human, like just so kind-hearted in his 60s. And I remember, like, obviously, you know, Mila was 3 weeks old, and he just said to me, like, my kids have left home, like, I have nothing to do but work. I will cover for you. Like, I will do the extra spreadsheets. Like, anything I can take off your plate, I will do, like, and enjoy it. And for me, I was like, wow, what a sense of community. And I wish it could work more because, like, you know, ultimately, like those years, particularly when your child's like under 5, but, you know, rarely through school, like it is different. But like when I was in my 20s, like I was happy to do everything. And I feel like the more that, you know, we can support each other as humans, and it's not competition, it's not trying to take someone's role. It's like, actually, in my life right now, I can give 110%. In my life right now, I can give 70%. But the way we could actually like cover for each other to actually just allow people to have that time, like I think is really important and something really nice. The other thing that
I just quickly want to say something there, because I'm just thinking about the people that would go, well, I don't want to have kids, so why should I cover for someone that's having kids? And so what I sometimes think with things like that, look, if you don't want to cover for somebody because you don't want to have kids, then don't do it. You're fine. But for somebody that does understand or would like to cover, but I guess it's fostering a type of workplace where this is the norm. Yeah.
And again, it's kind of like accepting you can be either, but just making sure there's enough of each. So like if you just want to be your like always 100%, like you don't worry about anyone else. But like if you can be someone who pays it forward, so that maybe then at that time there's someone else paying it forward, or you know. But again, like maybe then you're going to have a dependent parent. Like there's different stages in your life. It might not even be children where like you can't give your all. And if you've got that support network and that community, which I think is like probably easier when everyone was in the office, like it's harder, like the more kind of remote work there is.
What do you think about remote work?
So I'm like torn on it, because like as a mother, it's much easier. Like you can drop them off, like be on Zoom and do it. I worry about females, because I read a study and it was saying around like there's like proximity bias. So ultimately, the more you're face to face with someone, like the more chances you are of promotion, and also like creativity, conversations. Like it's never quite the same on Zoom. And when you give someone like the full choice about remote working, typically we're finding that particularly mums are choosing to work from home. Men are choosing to go into the office like 4 days a week, 5 days a week. And what you have to be really careful of is that we're not getting offices filled with men whilst the women are at home, because actually women have like gender equality has come on so much that that's a real risk, particularly for mums. So I think you have to find a way where like, I mean, I think the whole working week's ridiculous, by the way, Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. Like this was from the Henry Ford era, where you used to have like the traditional female at home that did all the jobs, just one in the household went to work. Like you can't have a household of 2 people both working full time and then expecting to like raise a child, like look after the house. Like it just doesn't work, like unless you can outsource all the help you need. So I think in general it needs looking at, but I think with remote working, you should try and, so I actually heard from a lot of women, they like it when they're forced into the office, like even if it's just 2 days a week, because actually we all have this guilt of like being a mum, like there's so much that needs doing that you're like, oh, well, if I'm at home, like I could do a wash, I could kind of do this other. Whereas they like getting into the office, but not feeling guilty, like they could have done differently. And equally with men, trying to force them to have a couple of days at home too, so that we're not getting back to a boys' club, which I think is like a danger of the workplace.
Yes, I hadn't thought about it like that. That's really interesting. Yeah. You've just literally expanded that so that I've totally seen what's happening. Yeah. We are going back to home to be a mum. And
and again, it is balancing, because gosh, like if you are a working mum, like the flexibility is so useful. But equally, like the men aren't choosing that. The men are still choosing to go in. Yeah. And like you know, I'm talking like stereotypically, and it's also interesting because I often have this conversation with my husband and like, you know, all of our different friends, and they're all great men, and I'm not meaning to call anyone out, because there's also choice. Like I love being like the maternal mum. Like I love being like, when my husband's like, oh, shall I pick the kids up today? I'm like, no, I want to. Yes. So like, I fight for it a bit, but I also think it's interesting for like any men to remember that in workplaces, like gender equality, well, in my experience anyway, and I know we're lucky at Deciem, but like it's pretty much gone, I think, in a lot of modern companies. Yes. So like we've done so much progress. And like, so I talked to my husband and obviously like all these peer group of men, and I truly like, they don't see any difference between females and males on hiring, which is incredible. Yeah, I know from speaking to my friends, like, you know, most of my friends are still carrying the majority of the mental load and kind of that responsibility. Women. And then again, it's interesting because I'm like, gosh, like these same husbands who are in the workplace, who I know are such advocates for like gender equality, need to remember at home that actually, like,
It's
if
the
you're
same
promoting
thing.
there, then you also have to be aware of like this mental workload and actually how much maybe is still falling on the women again.
Gender
in a lot of
equality in the
households.
home.
Yeah. Because I think people think about it just in the workplace around like, you know, they interview, they hire, but you also need to make sure at home, like, it's equal. If you choose that, because I think,
If you're both working.
yeah, because I also think, you know, people can like look, no one should look down on anyone. Like, I also think someone who's like, I'm just going to be a stay-at-home mum, I'm like, kudos to you, or stay-at-home dad. Like, it's such a short period. Like, if you can afford it, like, wow, go you. If you want to work, go you. Just like, it's all about making the choice for you. And again, like, we're very lucky, and like I was saying, like, we have the greatest support network. And you know, so I'm from Sheffield, I went to university in Nottingham, met my husband there, and like some people are like, oh gosh, like, you know, you live in Nottingham, as in there's obviously so many like incredible places in the world, and from a work perspective, we definitely both work more out of Nottingham. But I'm like, the village we have there, we actually live in a village, which I love, but also
it takes a village, right,
like,
to raise kids.
My husband's parents, like my mum, like their cousins, just like everyone around.
This has been so brilliant, Nicola. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you. You know, one of the weirdest, most inspiring things that you've just said to me, that it's not about being a grade A student or being perfect or being amazing. It's about who you are, what you learn. And the other thing I loved that you said was about being kind.
Yeah.
I've almost begun to hate that phrase, be kind, because people have started using it like an abusive term, a bullying.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But actually, just being courteous to each other
and
looking out for each other. Look how brilliantly you've made that work in your life.
Yeah. But I think kindness, like, you know, it's not about being a pushover. Like, I will stand my ground till at the end of time, but I'll always do it with respect. And I think it is just that balance of, like, for me, the most important thing in being a human is just like who you are, like your values, like your inner good.
Yes.
And actually, like, if you're a good person, and like, you know, and I think that's one thing in life now, I feel like I get coached every single day, because you open TikTok and like, it's like a therapist to you, and you get so much advice. But like, you know, I always just think about that thing around, like, in 100 years from now, no one will remember you, like everything will be gone. So actually all that matters when you're like in your last days is like, you've been a good person, like who's around your bed, like do you have love in your life, like do you attract those things? And sorry, I say that, but then I also believe in like freedom comes from decisions you make in life. And again, it's not to say like everyone needs to be an entrepreneur, because in many ways entrepreneurship doesn't give you freedom, because you never switch off, like you're constantly thinking. But it's just deciding what freedom means to you and just get going. Like I have some friends who is like always, they have ideas and it never becomes one.
Yeah.
Just like, you have nothing to lose in this world. Just try, like just get out there and do it.
I've stopped hugging Nicola Kilner now. I literally couldn't stop hugging her because she was so inspiring. There were so many things that she's been through that I thought, God, that actually would just finish someone off. But she's learnt from all her life experiences and carried them through and gone on to just be more and more and more successful because of it. I think the thing that I loved about her the most, the message that really surprised me, I think, is how kind she is and how she likes to foster a loving environment in the office. And that doesn't mean at the expense of being a tough businesswoman. That means at the expense of people. She believes in looking after her employees, but also her business colleagues. Doing business with someone should be a pleasure, not a punishment. God, and there were so many takeaways from this interview. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like, I'd love you to comment and let me know what you liked about it, and I'll try and bring you more content like that.